I should have known when she stopped laughing at my jokes. That's when it started. Kate used to laugh at everything I said, even the stupid stuff. You know, the kind of laughter that feels like you're winning in life? But over the last few months, her laughs became polite smiles, then nothing at all. But it wasn't the lack of laughter that clued me in. No, it was last Friday when I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with a spontaneous date night. I parked the truck outside and walked up to the house, thinking about how much we needed some alone time, something to break the routine. The house was unusually quiet for that time of day. Our 2 kids were at my sister's for the weekend, so I figured maybe Kate had gone out for a quick errand. As I stepped through the door, I saw her car in the driveway, which meant she was home. I wasn't expecting anything weird, just a normal Friday, but something was off. There was this silence, like the kind of quiet that wraps itself around you right before bad news hits. I called out her name. No answer. I walked through the hallway, heading toward our bedroom, hoping to find her napping or maybe getting ready for the evening. When I got to the bedroom door, I noticed it wasn't fully shut. I pushed it open a little and froze. There she was, Kate, standing in front of the mirror, wearing the exact outfit she had on at our wedding. That white dress, the one she promised she'd keep forever, was draped around her like a ghost of our past. Her hair was done up in the same style from that day, loose curls cascading down her back. But it wasn't some nostalgic moment of her trying to relive our wedding day or surprise me with a romantic gesture. Her phone was propped up on a small tripod, recording her as she stared at her reflection. The dress looked tighter, her face tense, and the scene unfolding in front of me wasn't the sweet memory it was supposed to be. It felt staged. Artificial. Like something you do when you're trying to rewrite a memory for someone else's benefit. She didn't notice me. Too caught up in whatever twisted thing she was doing. I just stood there, watching as she pulled off the dress and revealed lingerie I'd never seen before. She looked at herself in the mirror, but it was the expression on her face that hit me hardest. She wasn't admiring herself for me. I knew that look, she was getting ready for someone else. It wasn't until she turned around and gasped that she realized I was standing there. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I felt like I was intruding in a scene I wasn't supposed to be part of. My heart was pounding, my mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Steve. I didn't know you were home, she stammered, clutching the dress to her chest as if that would somehow fix the situation. I didn't respond. I just kept staring, my eyes shifting between the dress, the lingerie, and the phone that had been recording the whole thing. And in that moment, I didn't need to ask her any questions. I didn't need to demand an explanation. I knew what was going on, and it wasn't anything I could have prepared for. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at her, processing everything. Kate fumbled with the dress, her hands shaking as she tried to hold it together. I could tell she was scrambling to think of something, anything, to say that would make this situation less insane, but nothing was coming. The silence between us stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. It was like I wasn't even in the room, like she didn't know how to handle the fact that I had just caught her in whatever this was. She finally spoke, her voice low and shaky. Steve, it's not what you think. That sentence, not what you think, might be the most insulting thing you can say to someone who just walked in on their wife recording herself in a wedding dress. I didn't even know where to start, didn't even have the energy to fire back some sarcastic response. I just wanted to know why. Why the dress, why the phone, why she was standing there, looking like she was about to walk down the aisle for a second time, but clearly not for me. It's not what I think. Really? I said, finally breaking the silence, my voice sounding foreign even to me. Then tell me, Kate, because what I think is that my wife is standing here in the same dress she wore to marry me, and she's not doing it for me. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the floor, her fingers still clutching the fabric, trying to cover up. The seconds dragged on, and with each one that passed, I could feel my pulse pounding harder, my throat tightening, like I was suffocating on the weight of whatever was about to come next. Say something, Kate, I said, my voice getting louder now, more desperate. What the hell is going on? She finally looked up at me, and for a second, I thought I saw guilt flash across her face. But it disappeared just as fast as it came. It's not like that, Steve. It's complicated. I didn't mean for you to see this. That much is obvious, I snapped. But you're going to explain it to me, right here, right now. Kate sighed, dropping the dress onto the bed and running her hands through her hair. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumped like she was carrying some invisible weight that had finally gotten too heavy for her. I stood by the door, arms crossed, waiting for her to say something, anything that would give me an ounce of clarity. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, pushing us toward the inevitable conversation neither of us wanted to have. I've been seeing someone, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. I wasn't ready for her to just blurt it out like that, but there it was. No dancing around the subject. No sugarcoating it. Just the truth, laid out in the most blunt, matter-of-fact way possible. Like she was telling me she had gotten a parking ticket or that we were out of milk. Everything inside me felt like it collapsed in that moment. I thought I'd feel anger, rage, maybe even the urge to scream or break something, but instead, I just felt hollow. Empty. Like someone had reached inside me and pulled everything out, leaving nothing behind. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she'd just said, but it was like I was hearing it from a distance, like it wasn't really happening to me. How long? I managed to ask, my voice coming out flat, almost robotic. A few months, she admitted, her eyes still locked on the floor, too ashamed to look at me. It's not serious, Steve. I swear, it's just. Don't, I interrupted. Don't give me that it's not serious bullshit. You don't dress up in a wedding gown and record yourself for something that's not serious. Who is he? Kate finally looked up at me, her eyes glassy. He's just someone from work. Of course, it's someone from work, I muttered, running a hand over my face. How fucking cliché. She winced at that, like the truth of her own mediocrity was more painful than the betrayal itself. She tried to speak again, her words coming out in a rush. It's just been different between us lately, Steve. You know that. Things haven't been right for a while, and I didn't know how to fix it. So you thought fucking some guy from work was the answer? I said, my voice rising. Is that what you think fixes a marriage? You didn't know how to fix it, so you decided to sneak around behind my back? She stood up then, a bit of anger creeping into her voice. It wasn't like that. I didn't go looking for this. It just happened. Things like this don't just happen, Kate, I shot back. You made a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice to betray me. And now, here we are. So don't stand there and try to act like you're the victim. She opened her mouth to argue but then closed it again, realizing there was nothing she could say that would make this better. The air between us was thick with tension, with all the things I wanted to scream at her but couldn't find the words for. All the betrayal, the hurt, the confusion, it was too much to wrap my head around, too much to process all at once. I walked over to the bed, picked up the wedding dress, and held it in front of her. What's this for? What were you planning to do with this? Kate hesitated, glancing at the dress like it was a piece of evidence in a crime scene. I was going to show him. The room went deathly quiet. I dropped the dress, letting it fall to the floor in a crumpled heap. You were going to show him, I repeated, my voice barely more than a whisper. Our wedding dress. The one you wore when we said our vows. You were going to, what, reenact our wedding day for this guy? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence said more than enough. I took a step back, trying to breathe, trying to keep myself from doing something I'd regret. The realization that she was so far gone, so deep into this thing, that she'd even involved something as sacred as our wedding day, it was too much. I had to leave the room. I had to get out of there before I lost it completely. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with a million thoughts and none at all. I made my way downstairs, my legs barely able to carry me, and I collapsed onto the couch. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, like it was mocking me for not noticing sooner, for being so blind to what was going on right under my nose. I sat there, staring at nothing, trying to piece together what the hell had just happened. My wife, the woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children, had just confessed to cheating on me. Not only that, but she was getting ready to parade around in the very symbol of our commitment, all for some guy from her office. I wanted to scream, punch a hole in the wall, do anything to let out the anger that was building inside me, but I couldn't. I was too numb, too overwhelmed by the weight of it all. How do you react when everything you thought was real turns out to be a lie? When the person you trusted most betrays you in the most personal, intimate way possible? I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs, soft and hesitant, like she was afraid to face me again. She stood in the doorway, not saying anything, just watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I didn't. I couldn't. Because right then, I didn't know what my next move was. I didn't know if there was a next move. I didn't look at her when she walked into the living room. She stood there for a moment, like she didn't know what to do. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, trying to process the fact that my wife had just admitted to cheating on me. The silence stretched out, but I wasn't going to break it. I wasn't going to be the one who had to make this easier for her. Eventually, she walked around and sat in the armchair across from me. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to say something. I didn't give her that. She needed to sit with this for a while, just like I was. "Steve," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." Sorry. That word just hung in the air like it was supposed to mean something. Like it was supposed to make this better. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down before I lost control, before I said something I couldn't take back. "Sorry for what, Kate?" I asked, not looking at her. "Sorry that you got caught? Sorry that I walked in on whatever the hell that was upstairs? Or are you actually sorry for screwing some guy behind my back?" She flinched at that, like she wasn't expecting me to be so blunt. But what did she think was going to happen? I wasn't going to sugarcoat this for her. She deserved the cold, hard truth. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quietly, her hands nervously twisting the fabric of her shirt. It got out of control." "Got out of control," I repeated, finally turning my head to look at her. "How long has it been out of control, Kate? Because this isn't just some one-time mistake, is it?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No." "Then how long?" "A few months," she admitted, wiping her eyes. "I don't know exactly when it started. I just know that things between us weren't right, and I cut her off. "Don't sit there and try to make this about us. You want to cheat, that's on you. Don't drag me into it like I drove you to fuck someone else." Her tears started falling faster, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her turn this into some kind of emotional guilt trip where I was the bad guy for not being perfect or whatever excuse she was going to come up with. "It's not about that, Steve," she sobbed. "I wasn't happy. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. We stopped connecting." "Connecting?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "We have 2 kids, Kate. We've been married for 10 years. What the hell does connecting even mean? You couldn't connect with me, so you decided to connect with someone else?" She covered her face with her hands, shaking her head like she didn't know what to say. I stood up from the couch, the anger I'd been trying to suppress boiling over. I couldn't just sit there anymore and listen to her try to justify this. "Do you know what it's like to stand there and see your wife, the mother of your kids, in the dress she wore on our wedding day, getting ready to show it off to someone else?" I asked, my voice loud and sharp. "You're not just some woman I met last week, Kate. You're my wife. You're supposed to be better than this. You made vows. You promised me we'd work through whatever shit life threw at us, and this is how you handle it?" "I know," she cried. "I know I fucked up. But it's not what you think, Steve. It wasn't just about sex." "Oh, please," I scoffed. "Spare me the bullshit about how it was emotional or whatever crap you're going to try and feed me. You don't destroy a marriage for some emotional affair. You don't lie to my face for months because you needed a shoulder to cry on. This is about you, plain and simple. You wanted something else, and you went after it without giving a damn about what it would do to me or the kids. Her sobs got louder, and she kept shaking her head, like if she just cried hard enough, I'd stop yelling, or maybe I'd feel bad and forgive her. But I wasn't there yet. I wasn't anywhere near that point. I should have known, I said, pacing back and forth. I should have seen the signs. The late nights, the constant work stuff, the way you stopped caring about anything to do with me. But I didn't. I trusted you. I thought we were just going through a rough patch like every couple does. I didn't think you'd be sneaking around behind my back. I didn't want this to happen, she said, trying to steady her voice. It was a mistake, Steve. A mistake? I stopped pacing and looked at her. No. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or locking your keys in the car. This is not a mistake. This is you making a choice, over and over again, to betray me. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I love you, Steve. Don't, I snapped. Don't say that. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it again, realizing there was no point. She couldn't win this one. There was no justification, no excuse that could make this right. I stood there, staring at her, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do now. What the hell was I supposed to say to the woman who had just torn apart everything I thought we had? What was left? Who is he? I asked, my voice quieter now. Who is the guy? She hesitated, then wiped her face and looked down at her hands again. He's someone I met through work. Of course, it was. I don't know why I even bothered asking. I knew the answer before she said it. What's his name? I demanded. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, like she was afraid of what would happen if she actually told me. But I wasn't letting her get away with this. I wanted to know. Eric, she whispered. His name is Eric. Eric, I repeated. Eric from work. The guy you've been screwing behind my back for months. She nodded, biting her lip, trying to hold back more tears. Does he know you're married? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Yes, she said, barely audible. I clenched my fists, trying to keep myself from punching the wall. And that didn't bother him? I don't know, she whispered. He didn't care. That was it. That was the breaking point. I felt something snap inside me, like all the anger and betrayal I'd been holding back was ready to explode. I turned and grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a picture frame with a photo of our wedding day, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, the glass scattering across the floor. Kate screamed, jumping up from the chair, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the broken frame. I didn't care. I didn't care about any of it anymore. Everything was broken. What was one more thing? You want to know what's really messed up, Kate? I said, my voice shaking with rage. I wasn't even angry when you told me you cheated. I wasn't angry until you told me you did it in that dress. The one you wore when you promised me forever. I know, she sobbed. I'm sorry, Steve. I didn't. I don't want your fucking apologies. I shouted, cutting her off. You think sorry fixes this? You think you can just cry and say sorry and everything will go back to normal? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I know it won't. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen, but it did, I said, my voice still shaking. And now I have to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. What we're going to do. Kate sat back down in the chair, sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. I stood there, watching her, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or pull back. I wanted to hurt her the way she had hurt me. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal, the same devastation that was tearing me apart inside. But I didn't know how. I didn't know what revenge would look like. All I knew was that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in the living room, staring at the broken glass on the floor, replaying everything in my mind. Kate was upstairs, probably crying herself to sleep, but I didn't care. She was going to feel this, every single part of it. I needed to make sure she understood what it felt like to have your life torn apart. And not just her, I was going to destroy everything she thought was secure. I wasn't sure what my next move was, but I knew I needed to make it big. Something that wouldn't just hurt her for a moment, but something that would leave a permanent mark. The first thing I did was grab my phone. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the kind that thrives on this kind of destruction. I had heard about a guy through one of my friends, Greg something. A ruthless divorce attorney who was known for digging up dirt and making sure his clients came out on top. I shot off an email, outlining what had happened, and made it clear I was ready to file for divorce. But it wasn't just about splitting up the marriage. I wanted everything. I wanted the house, the kids, our savings, her car, everything that would leave her life in shambles. I wanted her to feel the same hollow, broken mess I was in, and I wasn't going to hold back. The email went out just as the clock hit 3 a.m. I set my phone down, but I still wasn't satisfied. I couldn't wait for the legal process to start, that would take time, and I needed to see her break now. So, I started thinking about her precious career. Kate loved her job. She took so much pride in it, always talking about how she was climbing the ladder at the real estate firm, getting more clients, more recognition. It had always bugged me how much time she spent at work, but now? Now I saw it for what it was, an excuse to meet up with Eric, her new partner in crime. I grabbed my laptop and started typing. I wasn't exactly a tech genius, but I knew enough to mess with her work life. I logged into our home internet and used it to find her work emails. She wasn't careful about passwords, I already knew most of them, and within minutes, I was scrolling through her inbox. I found emails between her and Eric, not the personal ones, but work-related ones. She had been careful, at least on the surface, but I wasn't looking for the obvious stuff. What I wanted was buried a little deeper, in her client files. She had notes saved on her desktop about her real estate deals, spreadsheets with client information, financial reports, and, most importantly, client leads she hadn't followed up on yet. It was all there, laid out for me to take. I downloaded everything, every email, every file, every sensitive document she had stored. By 4 a.m., I had enough ammunition to destroy her professionally. If I wanted to, I could leak these documents, send them to her firm, or worse, send them to her clients. I wasn't just going to make her lose a few deals, I was going to ruin her reputation. Once word got out that she was negligent with client info, that she had been secretly handing out bad leads or making shady deals on the side, her career would be over. But I didn't want to rush it. I needed to savor this. So, I saved everything to a flash drive and tucked it away in a drawer. That was step one. I was going to hit her where it hurt most, her job, her pride, her sense of control. The next steps would be personal, much closer to home. I looked around the living room, taking in all the photos of our family, the ones we had taken at the beach, at the park, all those moments that were supposed to mean something. They meant nothing now. The person I thought I knew was gone, and in her place was someone I barely recognized. It was time to make her realize that she had lost me for good. At around 5:30 a.m., the sun started to creep through the windows, and I could hear Kate stirring upstairs. The anger inside me started to simmer again as I heard her footsteps moving around, probably thinking that this would all blow over. Maybe she thought I'd calm down and we'd talk it out. She was wrong. I waited until she came downstairs. Her eyes were red, her face swollen from crying, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, waiting for me to make the first move. I didn't even look at her as I grabbed my keys and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from crying all night. "I need some air," I said flatly, not even bothering to look at her. She followed me to the door, trying to grab my arm. "Steve, please. We need to talk about this." I turned around, looking her dead in the eyes. "Talk? What's there to talk about, Kate? You fucked up. You threw away our marriage for some asshole at work, and now you want to talk? She flinched, but still tried to stand her ground. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I still love you. I let out a bitter laugh. Love me? If this is love, then you've got a pretty twisted idea of it. Steve, please, she begged. Don't leave. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I stepped closer, narrowing the gap between us. Counseling? You think sitting in front of a stranger is going to fix what you did? You think telling some therapist about how you cheated on me is going to make it all better? Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled back, not wanting her anywhere near me. I've already talked to a lawyer, I said, my voice cold. Divorce papers are coming. You better get ready. Her face crumbled, and she started to cry again, harder this time, like she didn't believe I'd actually go through with it. But I was done. There was no going back. I'll be back later, I said, turning toward the door. And when I do come back, you're going to be gone. Pack your shit and get out. She didn't follow me this time. She just stood there, sobbing as I slammed the door behind me and walked to the car. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away, clear my head, figure out what my next move would be. As I drove around aimlessly, I started thinking about the kids. Emily and Jake. They didn't deserve any of this. They didn't know yet, but they'd find out soon enough. And when they did, I wanted to be the one to explain it to them, not Kate. I wasn't going to let her paint herself as the victim in all this. I pulled over to the side of the road and sent a quick text to my sister. She lived close by and had taken the kids for the weekend. I told her I'd be coming by later to pick them up, but not to mention anything to them yet. I needed more time to figure out how I was going to handle this with them. After that, I just drove. I drove for hours, letting the anger and bitterness simmer inside me. But as the day dragged on, I realized that it wasn't enough. Ruining Kate's job, getting the divorce, none of it felt like enough. By the time I pulled back into the driveway that evening, I had made my decision. I was going to hit her where it really hurt, and I wasn't going to hold back. I grabbed the flash drive with all her work files, tucked it into my pocket, and headed back inside. Kate was sitting on the couch, her bags packed and stacked by the door. She looked up at me with those same red-rimmed eyes, but this time, there was no begging, no crying. She knew I wasn't going to budge. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while, she said quietly, her voice flat, like she had finally accepted what was happening. Good, I said, not even looking at her as I walked past. Steve, she started, but then stopped herself. She knew better than to push it any further. She grabbed her bags and left without another word. The second she was gone, I grabbed my phone and started typing up an anonymous email. I attached the files I'd pulled from her computer, every sensitive document I had. I sent it to her boss, a few clients, and just for good measure, the HR department. I knew what this would do. All they needed to understand was that their family was going to be different, and that wasn't going to change. That conversation haunted me for the rest of the day. I could feel their sadness, their confusion, even if they didn't say much. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, playing games and watching movies, but the tension was there, hovering over us like a storm waiting to break. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Kate. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't want to talk to her, but I knew this was inevitable. I typed back a short reply. Tomorrow. Come by in the morning. I didn't sleep much that night, knowing what was coming. The next morning, I woke up early, before the kids were even stirring. I needed to be ready for her. I needed to stay calm, stay in control. I wasn't going to let her twist this conversation into something about us or how we could fix it. There was no fixing it. She had made her choice, and now it was time for her to deal with the consequences. By 9 a.m., Kate pulled up to the house. I watched from the window as she got out of the car, hesitating for a moment before walking up the steps. When she knocked on the door, I opened it without a word and stepped aside to let her in. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't the polished version of herself that she usually presented to the world. This was a woman on the edge, barely holding it together. We sat down in the kitchen, facing each other across the table. As she stood up to leave, I felt a strange sense of finality settle over me. This was it. The end of our marriage. The end of everything we had built together. But there was no going back. Before she walked out the door, she turned to me one last time. "Steve. I really am sorry." I didn't respond. I just watched as she left, closing the door softly behind her. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt lighter. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew this wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the beginning of something new. Something I had to face on my own terms. I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from me. This was my life now, broken, but mine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. After Kate left, the silence in the house was suffocating. It was a strange kind of calm, one that didn't bring any comfort. I'd kicked her out, served her the divorce papers, and ensured she'd lose her job. But I didn't feel victorious. There wasn't that satisfaction I'd expected after delivering my revenge. I was still hollow inside, like none of this had actually settled yet. The kids woke up later that morning, and life forced me to keep going. I made them breakfast, helped them get ready for school, and pretended everything was okay. But they weren't stupid. Emily barely touched her food, and Jake kept asking about their mom. I knew I couldn't avoid the truth forever, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation again so soon. After dropping them off at school, I had nothing to do but think. Kate's last words echoed in my head, "I really am sorry." Sorry didn't matter anymore. Sorry didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the betrayal, the lies, the wreckage of our marriage. But as much as I hated her for what she did, a small part of me wondered if I had truly won. Sure, I had taken away her job, her home, and her family, but what had I really gained? I decided to take a drive. I needed to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life now that everything had come crashing down. I ended up driving to the park where Kate and I used to take the kids when they were little. It was empty, just like I felt inside. I sat there, staring at the empty playground, thinking about the years we had spent together, how it had all seemed so perfect once. How the hell had we gotten to this point? My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I hesitated before looking at it, half expecting another message from Kate. But it wasn't her. It was a notification from my lawyer's office, confirmation that Kate had been officially served with the divorce papers. It was done. Legally, there was no turning back now. I stared at the message for a moment before turning off my phone. I didn't want to think about the legal side of things anymore. The paperwork would take care of itself. What I couldn't figure out was what to do next. How was I supposed to move on from this? I stayed at the park for what felt like hours, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, the light filtering through the trees, casting long shadows over the empty swings and slides. At some point, I realized I needed to pick the kids up from school, so I headed back home, trying to pull myself together. The kids didn't ask many questions when I picked them up, and I was grateful for that. But I could feel their unease, the way they were trying to act like everything was normal when they knew it wasn't. Emily was quieter than usual, lost in her own thoughts, while Jake kept stealing glances at me from the back seat, as if he was waiting for me to say something. That night, after I put them to bed, I sat down in the living room, staring at the photos on the wall, pictures of our family from years ago, back when things were good. I thought about taking them down, about erasing every trace of Kate from the house, but something stopped me. As much as I wanted to forget her, she was still the mother of my kids. And no matter how much I hated what she had done, I couldn't just erase her from their lives. I got up and walked into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge. I sat back down at the table, the same table where Kate and I had shared so many conversations over the years, both good and bad. It was strange to think that those moments were gone now, that our life together was officially over. As I sat there, I realized something. All this time, I had been so focused on revenge, on making Kate pay for what she had done, that I hadn't really thought about what came after. I had torn her world apart, but now I was left with the pieces of mine, and I didn't know what to do with them. I thought about the kids, about how they were going to grow up in a broken home now, how this would affect them. I thought about what kind of father I wanted to be, whether I was capable of giving them the stability they needed after all of this. They had already lost enough. I couldn't let my bitterness and anger make things worse for them. Kate had destroyed our marriage, but I wasn't going to let her destroy my relationship with the kids. That was something worth fighting for, something worth holding on to. I had to focus on them, on being there for them, even if I wasn't sure how to handle everything else. As I finished my beer, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Kate. I hesitated before opening the message. I didn't know what else she could possibly have to say at this point, but curiosity got the better of me. I'm sorry. I'm staying at my sister's for now. I want to see the kids tomorrow if that's okay. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Fine. But I'll be there when you do. I wasn't going to let her see the kids without me. Not yet. She didn't get to waltz back into their lives like nothing had happened. I didn't trust her, and I wasn't going to let her hurt them the way she had hurt me. The next day, she showed up at the house. I made sure to stay in the room while she talked to the kids. Emily barely said a word to her, while Jake was a little more open, but I could tell he was confused. He didn't understand why she wasn't staying at home anymore. After she left, I sat the kids down. I knew it was time to tell them more, to give them something concrete, something they could hold on to in this mess. Look, I started. I know you're both wondering what's going on with your mom and me. Emily nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor. We're getting divorced, I said again, just to make sure they understood. It doesn't mean we don't love you both. That's never going to change. But things between me and your mom, they're different now. Emily finally spoke up, her voice small and trembling. Did she do something bad? I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. Your mom and I just don't agree on some things anymore, and it's not something we can fix. Jake looked up at me with wide eyes. But why can't you fix it? Don't you love each other? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to keep my emotions in check. We did, Jake. But sometimes, love isn't enough. It was a lie, and I knew it. Love had been enough. But trust? That was what she broke, and there was no fixing that. But they didn't need to hear that part. Not yet. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life started to settle into a new rhythm. The kids spent most of their time with me, but I let them see Kate regularly. She stayed at her sister's, but I could tell she was trying to piece her life back together, just like I was. The difference was, I didn't care about what happened to her anymore. I had my own life to rebuild, and that was all that mattered. One night, about a month after the divorce papers were filed, I sat on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. I wasn't thinking about Kate anymore. I wasn't thinking about the revenge, the anger, or the betrayal. I was thinking about what came next. What I wanted for myself, for the kids, for the life we had to live without her. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could see a way forward. It wasn't going to be easy, but I'd made it this far. I could do the rest. Kate had made her choices, and so had I. Now it was time to move on. And for the first time, that didn't feel so impossible.